In this post-apocalyptic thriller, mysterious gates opened out of nowhere, and from it came monsters unimaginable. Fortunately for the human race, the opening of the gates also activated the supernatural abilities of a few humans. These humans bore the fate of the world in their palms. They're the saviors of mankind. They're the players. Don't ask me. I don't come up with the names. The Great Steel Emperor, Lee Hunwook, although an F rank, was called humanity's last hope. Unfortunately, he got killed by his nemesis, Gordon Precy. Now you're thinking, if our protagonist is dead this early into the series, what happens next? He regressed, just like in the games you play. Lee Hunwook gets transported into the past, 3 days before a solstice event. The only downside is he has to cultivate his powers from scratch. Present timeline and all players are made to train in the army, the anti-monster troop to be precise. Lee Hunwook has his head upside down and pressed against his helmet, just like the rest of the troop. Maybe the blood flowing to their head is good for their abilities. The superintendent is mad because cartridges keep getting missing, and everyone, especially Lee Hunwook, keeps quiet. It turns out he's been stealing the cartridges to eat them. It's the curse of his ability. Yeah, he's weird like that. You'll see why, though. The more metal he consumes, the greater the weight of metal he can manipulate. Lee Hunwook remembers the first time he'd been around, before his death, that is. The world had fallen into great chaos. People were left to die. Buildings crumbled into dust and lawlessness flourished alongside it. Think the Purge, but with unnatural monsters. The worst part was that this destruction wasn't caused by monsters, no. It was caused by players just like himself. Gordon Precy called himself a divine creature sent to judge humanity. You can imagine this self-absorbed junkie. This leaves Lee Hunwook with nothing but regret for his weakness as Gordon Precy makes his underlings smash Lee in the head with a huge pickaxe. It wasn't pretty at all. Now you see why Lee Hunwook will do anything to take down Gordon Precy. Back to the present, and Lee has only amassed 3 grams worth of metal to manipulate. He's determined to get it up before the 3 days elapse. Don't laugh, he'll definitely get it up. They finish their training with the superintendent and he lets them stand upright. Lee is the head of Squad 3, Platoon 2, hence he's a corporal. Mr. Not-So-Big Shot, if you may. Lee's team is stopped by a rank D superior officer, Oh Sang-guk, on their way to lunch. He tells Lee that there's some work he and his team need to do before they can eat. Oh Sang-guk is someone we hate. Don't ask me why. Just know we hate him. Okay, he tries to pull rank on Lee, calling him and his team useless and weak. He goes as far as trying to pick a fight, but this is Lee Hunwook's second life, and he doesn't plan on wasting it by causing a scene. Lee patronizes Oh Sang-guk, telling him that he and his team would carry out whatever task he has for them on the condition they just eat first. Lee points out the amount of people already looking at them and makes Oh Sang-guk understand the bad publicity it will raise if people think of him as an abusive superior. King Solomon wiser. This throws off Oh Sang-guk because Lee is actually right. He awkwardly releases them to go eat. Lee leaves his right-hand man, Park Junmo, and finds a corner he can have to himself. Oh Sang-guk senses a change in Lee Hunwook. Of course there's a change. This is someone who's lived this life before. Lee randomly remembers Gordon Precy. He's grateful he didn't cause any ruckus with Oh Sang-guk because that would have led to something else. Something else is never good, I should know. I once had something else, and now I'm single, making recaps for you lovely people. Anything that would delay Lee's leveling up will always come second. He pulls out a bunch of spoons and has his own version of lunch. Back in the refectory, the soldiers complain because they have nothing to eat their lunch with. Lee weighs a bayonet and concludes that, at the rate he's going, he'll only be able to control one at a time. He's lucky he still has 3 days to go. It's D-Day. Lee Hunwook and Park Junmo are on lookout duty, but Lee is totally distracted. Park points out that Lee has changed. He can't tell Park the reason why, so he asks if he trusts him, and Park says he does. That's quite risky, Park. Lying to your superior. At this point, Lee is already capable of manipulating 1.3 kilograms of metal and is eagerly waiting for the monsters to arrive. A gate opens up amidst the sky and gooey liquid plops down from it, alongside life-size goblins, bearing fangs, claws, and hunched backs that would make Notre Dame jealous. They touch down right on time to meet an eager Lee Hunwook. he attacks the first goblin on sight with a wide smile on his face. Unfortunately, he doesn't kill it. He realizes that he's still weaker than his former self. This doesn't dampen his fighting spirit, though. He spins the bayonet for momentum and sends it straight to the neck of the monster. Its head comes clean off. The goblin coughs up a piece of mana steel, and Lee completely swallows it. Ever seen monsters surprised? I didn't say scared. I mean utterly shocked. Their ugly faces became even uglier. I think this expression is called disgust. He gains mana steel absorption as part of his abilities, and as much as he hates the taste of mana steel, he resolves to eat any type of steel that can increase his power. The portal doesn't close, and so more monsters pour in. Lee is too hyped up to be worried about such things. Back when he found out about the gate opening, Lee had put his hand around Park Junmo's mouth to stop him from screaming. He'd lied to him that he could sense the metal from the monsters when all he wanted was to get to their steel before the military did. Ooh, an inside job. On that account, Lee begged Park Junmo not to leave his post no matter what. Back to it. As the monsters pour in, Lee uses his bayonet to cut them down by the legs, incapacitating about 10 of them at a time. Just then, one of the goblins rushes in from behind Lee, but it's not fast enough. Fun fact, Lee was attacked from behind in his last life. Dude gets pissed off whenever anyone tries to do that again. He quickly summons the sword of one of the goblins and uses it to block the attack. He then uses his bayonet to end its life. The goblin coughs up yet another mana steel. He threatens to eat the next goblin that tries to attack him from behind, and you can just tell that these monsters believe him. Lee can sense the presence of a much stronger, much smarter enemy, and his main goal is to snuff it out. True to Lee's suspicion, the goblin shaman watches carefully from atop a nearby tree as Lee fights off the rest of its goblins. Lee observes the mana steel on the floor and pretends to pick it up all in an attempt to snuff out the shaman. It works. The shaman casts a spell on a tablet from its necklace and throws it to the ground beside Lee Hunwook. The ground morphs and shoots out like icebergs, taking the lives of more goblins. The main target, Lee Hunwook, gracefully escapes like the TV remote when you really need it. The goblin shaman is surprised by the speed with which Lee escapes his trap, and Lee retaliates by sending a goblin sword straight at the shaman. He deflects it, but it doesn't matter because that was a fake-out. Lee's bayonet follows immediately. It's too quick for the shaman to dodge, and so he catches it. It's Lee's turn to be surprised. He bluffs to the shaman, telling him to get down from the tree so he can slice him up to pieces. Meanwhile, in reality, the other goblins are drawing closer to him, and he has no idea what to do next. To make everything better, he receives a warning that his mana levels are running low. What a wonderful world! He has no choice but to turn to the weapon of man's destruction, the gun. He cocks it and aims straight at the goblin shaman. Just then, he hears his name from a distance. Is his right-hand man disobeying direct orders? What on God's earth is Park Junmo doing here? The goblin shaman immediately sends his men after Park Junmo. Lee turns around and screams at him to get down. He fires at will and the bullets fly off of this monster. Lee then uses a sword to attack it, but it parries it away with a sword of its own. En garde. Lee covers the distance and shoves the muzzle of his gun into the mouth of the goblin and shoots it dead. Too bad the goblin shaman escapes alongside the surviving goblins. The gunshots are loud enough to disturb the base, and the higher-ups put a call through to all posts. Lee Hunwook then reports the occurrence of a gate in Post 5 and tells his boss about the goblins too. After he noticed that they'd query him if he didn't. Sly guy. Orders come for him and Park Junmo to stand by and defend their post. Lee knows that they'll send the paladin of AMT, Lieutenant Seo Yunha. And when she comes, his chance of getting his hands on some nice metals will be slim to none, especially the special grade metal called adamantium, which gave Lee Hunwook his title of Steel Emperor in the past. The next chance he'll get to consume adamantium will be 4 years from now, and Lee cannot wait that long so that things will not play out the exact same way they did. You know how a stitch in time doesn't cost a dime, or how did the saying go again? He resolves to get to the adamantium before Seo Yunha, despite his orders to stay put. Just then, reports come from the 6th post about another gate, with more goblins flooding in. Lee sees this as an opportunity and seeks to support the sixth post. Park Junmo tries to remind him of their orders, but Lee doesn't care. He gives a lame excuse that's not so lame. The sixth post consists of only long-ranged attackers, and so Lee uses that as his excuse to lend them a helping hand. Park Junmo begs him not to go alone, but Lee has no intention of doing that. He's bringing Park Junmo, along with or without his permission. Back at the sixth post, Corporal Kim Jong-ok has been injured severely. They take solitude in a barrier that's barely holding up against a swarm of goblins. Corporal Kim's right-hand man, Archer Private Park, calls for backup as though he didn't just do that mere seconds ago. He's shocked when everything goes from panic to complete silence, and is even more troubled by this. As he should be. The Shaman King had cleared out the goblins from the barrier so he could attack it personally. He levitates small rocks and shoots them at the barrier just like bullets. The integrity of the barrier wanes with each attack, and Archer Private Park lets his mind go wild. He's got an overactive imagination, or maybe not. He thinks the goblins will break the barrier, capture them, and then pluck out their hearts on an altar of sacrifice. Definitely overactive. He's still in his head when Corporal Kim points his gun to himself, saying it'll be easier to die than to continue through such pain. Suicide is never the answer, folks. There's always another way. Always. The shaman sends a second wave of stones, and Archer Private Park is already in tears. His walkie-talkie hums to life with instructions to aim his electronic bow and arrow towards the light. He's confused about which light the voice on the other end is referring to, but it repeats the instruction. This time it asks Private Park to use the fire skill alongside the bow and arrow, and just aim for the light. Blind trust is risky, but what choice does he have? Private Park does as he's told, with no sign of the light whatsoever. The goblin shaman is about to launch another attack when he sees the light. The man on the other end of the walkie-talkie is Lee Hunwook. This troublemaker might just save their lives after all. All Lee asks of the private is to aim towards the light. He plans to pull the metal trigger remotely. He takes the first shot, and the flaming arrow comes straight for the chest of a goblin. The flame consumes it upon impact, and Lee is fast enough to leave harm's way. This cost him only 1% of his mana. This way he gets to take out the goblins and save his mana. The last attack nipped his shoulder, but it's nothing Lee can not shrug off. This may not be martial arts, but I stand Lee because he's tough. The flaming arrow distracts the shaman, and he misses the barrier. Lee instructs Private Park to reload his bow and aim for the light, and they take out one goblin each time. Park Junmo is left to search for the shaman's location, but has no idea how to go about it. This one's too scared for my liking, but what to do? As he slithers through the bushes, trying to stay discreet, a goblin catches wind of him. So much for discreet. The monster lifts its sword to attack him, and instead of defending against it, Park Junmo puts both hands on his head and screams for someone to save him. Lee sends his bayonet just in time to counter the goblin's attack. He pulls Archer Private Park's bow and lets more flaming arrows fly. The shaman growls with disdain, for too many of his men have been killed by this Lee Hunwook person. Just then, Lee receives a warning that his mana is at 12%. His eyes search the area for the shaman, but he can't find him. Lee suspects that the shaman is waiting for his mana to run out before he attacks, but that's not the case. Private Park screams for help yet again. He's so weak. I'm done, guys. This time the shaman had him off the ground with the edge of his staff pointing at the private's neck. Lee tries to attack with his bayonet, but the shaman cuts Park Junmo's neck a little to prove he's serious. This makes Lee lift his hands and surrender. There's a smile on his face, and the goblins don't know why. Park Junmo absent-mindedly had his gun pointed at the goblin shaman. With lifted hands, Lee Hunwook remotely pulls the trigger. No one sees it coming, even I didn't. Park Junmo has finally proven useful. Thank the gods. The shaman coughs up a healthy amount of blood upon impact and releases Park Junmo from his grip. After confirming his partner's safety, Lee sends his bayonet after the shaman in what he thinks will be the finishing blow, but the shaman has on leather armor. 9% mana remaining, and fingers crossed, guys. The shaman races down to the gate in a bid to escape, but Lee cannot let that happen. He races after it with equal speed, but his mana drops to 7%. He notices the necklace the shaman has on is made out of steel and pulls him back in with it. Lee's mana levels are counting down like a crowd just before New Year's, but it doesn't matter. He uses his last mana to thrust his bayonet into the shaman's neck. He pants for air and promises to work out after the ruckus dies down. Lee's interrupted by a sudden burst of light. Lieutenant Seo Yuna has arrived the scene, and this is bad news for him. As the lieutenant and her team draw closer to the scene, Lee rummages the corpse of the shaman for the adamantium. He finally fishes it out, and it's covered with green blood. The other soldiers arrive the scene and put Lee at gunpoint. He shoves the rare gem into his mouth as he's asked to identify himself. Lee does so with green blood smeared all over his lips like a kid who just raided the cookie jar. Lieutenant Seo assesses the situation and is shocked to realize that all the goblins were taken down by one man. The soldiers put Lee Hunwook on a stretcher and he can't stop smiling. This surprises the lieutenant even more. He gets a congratulatory prompt telling him that the adamantium he consumed is underway to absorption. Lee can manipulate any weight of metal he chooses after the absorption process is done with, and after absorption, he unlocks a new skill, one that allows him to sense any metal within his range of control. The Steel Emperor has finally got his groove back. That'll be all for now, folks. Don't forget to like and hit that subscribe button to see more of our amazing videos. Thank you and see you next time.